Good morning. It's good to see everyone this morning on this beautiful Sunday. We are so glad that you're here this morning. If you are visiting with us, we are especially happy to see you. If you would do us a favor, there is a card in the pew in front of you. If you'll fill that out, put that in the offering plate later in the service. We would love to get to know you a little bit better and tell you about our church and family here at Trinity Baptist. If you all will open your bulletins and follow along, there's a few announcements for us to go over this morning. Our Puerto Rico team has a blog that you can access and follow while they continue to do their work there this week. They will be back this Wednesday, so please do continue to pray for them and the work that they are doing there. Tonight is the last night that our TU classes will meet. They start at 6 o'clock. Due to the fall break coming up next week, we'll only have one worship service, one late worship service, let me say that, next Sunday on the 14th, and no PM activities that night or Wednesday the 17th. The Fellowship and Recreation Committee will host a covered dish fellowship and game night on Sunday the 21st at 6 p.m. We ask that you bring a casserole or salad to share and be ready to play Let's Make a Deal. You have probably seen posters and flyers around the church about our Fall Fun Fest coming up in October. That'll be October 28th from 2 to 4 p.m. We'll have lots of games and food, and we are in need of volunteers and baked goods to help us put on this event. You can see the sign-up sheets and sign up for that in the gathering area. Ladies' Fall Bible Study will not meet for the next 2 weeks, but they will resume on October 22nd. Youth Choir will meet tonight at 5 p.m., Children's Choir will meet at 6 p.m., and our youth will attend ministry projects tonight at 6 and head over to Moe's afterwards. Pickup is at Moe's on Highway 72 at 8 o'clock. If you will please stand with me now for the passing of the peace. Welcome to Moe's. That's what I always say. It's great to see everyone. We are so glad you're here. Welcome to worship. Please join me in prayer. Heavenly Father, I just thank you for an amazing day that you've given us. I'm just so thankful for you bringing us together. Thank you so much for loving us and teaching us. Let us learn that in order to be better disciples of you, we must follow the commandments and the boundaries that you set for each of us. We love you and we praise you. In your holy name we pray. Amen.
Let us now sing together our hymn of invocation, hymn number 60, Be Thou My Vision. Please stand as we sing together. Be thou my vision, O Lord of my heart, not be all else to me, save that thou art. Thou my best thought by day or by night, waking or sleeping, thy presence my light. Be thou my wisdom and thou my true word, I ever with thee and thou with me, Lord. Thou my great Father, I thy true Son, thou in me dwelling and I with thee one. Riches I heed not, or man's empty praise, thou my mine inheritance now and always. Thou and thou only first in my heart. I, King of heaven, my treasure thou art. I, King of heaven, my victory won. May I reach heaven's joy, so bright heaven's sun. Heart of my own heart, whatever befall, still be my vision, O ruler of all. Please be seated.
This is a time in our service that we ask you to be silent and to be still, to reflect on why you are here today. A time to speak with God and allow Him into your heart so that you can take today's message and move it and share it beyond these walls. Please take a moment to pray with me. God, we come to you today in full thankfulness for all that you continue to do in our lives. Let us constantly strive to be better examples of you. We ask this in your name. Amen.
Today's scripture lesson is Exodus chapter 20, verses 1 through 17. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself an image in the form of anything in heaven above, or on the earth beneath, or in the waters below. You shall not bow down to them or worship them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, punishing the children for the sin of their parents to the third and fourth generation of those who hate me, but showing love to 1,000 generations of those who love me and keep my commandments. You shall not misuse the name of the Lord your God, for the Lord will not hold anyone guiltless who misuses his name. Remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you, nor your son or your daughter, nor your male or female servant, nor your animals, nor any foreigner residing in your towns. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that is in them, but he rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blesseth the Sabbath day and made it holy. Honor your father and your mother, so that you may live long in the land the Lord your God is giving you. You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not give false testimony against your neighbor. You shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, or his male or female servant, his ox or donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbor. God bless the reading of his word.
At this time, our pre-K and our kindergartners are invited to exit for children's worship as we sing together our hymn of care, hymn number 23, God is So Good. Please stand as we sing together. God is so good. God is so good. God is so good. He's so good to me. He cares for me. He cares for me. He cares for me. He's so good to me. I love him so. I love him so. I love him so. He's so good to me. I praise his name. I praise his name. I praise his name. He's so good to me. Please be seated.
Today's mission moment will focus on CBF field personnel Scarlett Jasper, who serves people who are economically poor in several counties in Kentucky. Because of the level of poverty in the area where she was living, Scarlett became frustrated with the practices of payday lending and how it was taking advantage of persons in financial need. These payday lending groups promise a rapid economic solution, but instead create a downward spiral of debt. Scarlett began to find ways to try to end this type of abuse in people's lives. She began to share in churches about how not to get caught in this web, and if you are spiraling down, how to slowly pull out. She shares things like budgeting, wise shopping habits, coupon snipping secrets, and other personal management skills. Scarlett ministers and shows the love of Christ to some of the most economically disadvantaged individuals in her state. Please pray silently to the people that Scarlett Jasper serves, and for Scarlett as she continues to serve these people in needs. Amen.
Good morning. It's so good to be with you in worship today. Before I begin, I want to remind you of what we're doing on Sunday mornings as we go in the fall through the books of the Old Testament. We're sort of thinking about the chronological story as best we can, the story of God that's presented to us in the Old Testament. And if you remember, a few weeks ago, we began in September with creation. And then we talked about how God discovered that people just, no matter even if they tried or not, many of them didn't care, didn't try, were not able to live up to the ideals of what God expected for humanity. Then we have almost this recreation of the world through the flood event, and God choosing to work through an individual family. We think about Noah and Noah's Ark in that story. And then we followed along in the story where God is beginning to work through individuals, and most specifically through Abraham and Sarah. You might remember those two. And if you remember, it's a distinct way that God is continuing to be involved in our world and in our lives because God cares so much for us. And God is choosing, as God works through Abraham and Sarah, not just to bless them, but the goal, God says, is through you and through your family that will become a great nation to bless everyone in the world. So God is choosing now to work through individual people to bless not only the person, but the world through them. And then we looked at the story of some of the relatives, the distant relatives of Abraham, Joseph and his family. Joseph ends up in prison, and we talked about how God was with him, even though the promise that this would be a great big family that would bless the world seems in great jeopardy when Joseph's in prison. Later, his people will migrate to Egypt, and they will grow vast in numbers, but they will be enslaved in bondage in Egypt. And then we talked about last week the story of the parting of the sea with Moses as God works through Moses and Aaron and Miriam to lead the people out of bondage in Egypt. And as they do that, they realize that God has continued to work with them, and now is sort of looking at the group. And today we're going to talk about something known as the giving and the sharing of the covenant of God. So as these people have escaped, they've gotten out of Egypt, they're in the wilderness, and they're going to meet at the same mountain area where Moses first received his call from God at the burning bush. And they will have a meeting where they will make a promise to each other. God says, I will be your God and you will be my people. And the purpose of this is that they will become a holy people, a holy nation for the world. And through them, they will be like priests to the world. They will do those ministerial functions of taking care of people. Years ago, we used to always talk about churches as every member a minister. Thinking about that idea that God would work through each person now, not just individuals here and there, but through every person to bless the world. And that's where we are today. We often think about this story as the Ten Commandments, the giving of the Ten Commandments. Mark did a good job reading all of those for us today from Exodus chapter 20. And because the Ten Commandments have been very fascinating to us through the years, there's a lot of legends that have developed. And some of the most ancient legends tell us that, you know, if you've seen ever the movie or something, Ten Commandments, you think about this mountain and God in this fire carves out of the rock these Ten Commandments. Moses carries those big heavy rocks down, these big tablets of stone. Some of the legends say that those stones were not made out of the rock of this mountain. They weren't the dusty, sandstone of the Middle East. They were blue sapphire because they came directly from heaven. Okay? And you can imagine how heavy those stones would be. Some legends say that Moses could have carried them down with only one finger because they floated. Isn't that amazing? The Hebrew says it this way, they carried their own weight down the mountain. So there's a lot of legends about it. I want you to think about when you first heard about the Ten Commandments. And maybe for some of you, you were a child. That's the way it was for me. I remember two things distinctly. One was getting a bookmark. I don't remember who gave it to me. It could have been a Sunday school teacher or a relative. It was a bookmark. The top was the Ten Commandments. And it had two, looked like pictures of the tablets like Moses would have had. And then it had the listing of the Ten Commandments on the other side. The second was the first Bible I remember getting. My grandmother gave me this Bible. It was a blue Bible and it had pictures in it. And as a child, I loved those pictures. And one of the pictures when it came to the Ten Commandments was a picture of this, this Moses with the gray beard and the hair everywhere, had these two big tablets. He's coming down the mountain and carrying these two heavy tablets of stone. It didn't look like they were floating to me, but that's what he was carrying with him. So think about for you, when you first encountered the Ten Commandments, when did you hear them? Somebody once said about, as I was reading some commentaries about this story in preparation for the sermon, said that they're one of the most widely recognized ideas. When you hear about the Ten Commandments, a lot of people in our vocabulary and language, church or not, have heard of the Ten Commandments, but a lot of people don't know exactly what the Ten Commandments are. So if I were to give you a test today as you leave and say, pick up a sheet of paper and I want you to list for me the Ten Commandments, how would you do? I remember reading when I first started out as a minister in the Alabama Baptist newspaper, somebody wrote in lamenting the fact about how few ministers could actually recite the Ten Commandments in order. So here's my deal today. No test for you and no test for me. Is that okay? All right. But maybe we'll all go home and read the Ten Commandments and think about them a little more, okay? So let's think about them a little more in depth today. First of all, it's interesting to note that we call them the Ten Commandments. It doesn't say that in the Bible. Isn't that interesting? The Hebrew word is the 10 words or the 10 sayings of God. It never says it. All through the book of Exodus, we can't find it. In Deuteronomy, where we get a second version as Moses is remembering the story, it's a little different version of the Ten Commandments. They're still the 10 words, the 10 sayings of God. And we look at those Ten Commandments, a lot of people have said they seem to have a division, a natural division to them. The first part of them seem to have to do with our relationship to God, a vertical dimension. The others have to do with our relationship with people in our world, a horizontal dimension. So how we are right with God and how we're right and cool with the people in the world in which we live. Well, when I thought about it and thinking about today, I went on and jumped pretty far into the New Testament and thought about another story that sounds similar to this story. It's a story of Jesus giving a sermon on the mountain. You remember that? The Sermon on the Mount. It's Matthew chapter 5, 6, and 7. And in that story, Jesus goes up on a mountain and he says things similar to the commandments, but it's very detailed. This is how you should live your life. And it's a lot of stuff that seems like rules and standards that are very difficult for us to live by. Now, if you go over there and you visit and you go to Sea of Galilee and you say, I want to see the place where the Sermon on the Mount was, they'll point you to this place. It's really a beautiful, beautiful place, but it's not like a mountain for me. You could walk up and down it, 30 minutes up, easy stroll, 30 minutes, easy stroll down. It's not like a huge mountain top. But the people there have an interesting concept about it. Almost all of them will say, if Jesus wanted to share this Sermon on the Mount with a lot of people, there's no way He was at the top of the mountain and everybody's sitting down below listening, because you can't hear. So how would that work? Jesus would have been at the bottom like an amphitheater, and everybody's at the top and speaking, so the voice would carry there. So I don't know exactly which way is right, but I think it is interesting because Matthew says this is the Sermon on the Mount. He doesn't say this is the Sermon on the Amphitheater, right? So it's sort of interesting. Why would Matthew say that if the people are all over there saying, no, there's no way you could hear? Well, let's throw out what we think about that, but part of it could be Matthew has this concept. I'm telling you the story of Jesus, and I want to tell you how great and wonderful Jesus is. And so one of the things he does is set up his gospel to be a parallel in 5 ways to the same 5 books of the Old Testament, the first 5 books called the books of Moses. Okay? The law of Moses. So Matthew chapter 5 through 7 is the first of a long speech that Jesus gives. And there's 5 of those. And I think maybe Matthew is saying, look, I don't care if it was at the bottom of the amphitheater or the top of a tall, tall mountain. I just want you to know, here's Jesus, and I'm presenting Him as better than Moses. I'm presenting Him as the best of all. So He's going to have Jesus say this, you've heard it said, but I say to you. So I'm not bringing you down tablets. I'm the words that's speaking, and those are the very words of God, just like Moses did, but a little better. Okay? So I don't know, however you want to take it, it's fine with me. But either way, 10 words, 10 commandments, Sermon on the Mount, Sermon at the Amphitheater, both of those have these really high standards of living for us. They're high, really ethical demands. So the 10 Commandments, don't lie. Don't commit adultery. Don't covet or be jealous or wish you had what other people have. That's pretty difficult, isn't it? And then you get in the Sermon on the Mount, and Jesus says, turn the other cheek if somebody slaps you. If somebody compels you to walk 1 mile, you go ahead and volunteer for a 2-mile walk with them. That's pretty tough, isn't it? And He says something that's maybe the most difficult for all. Pray and love your enemies. That's tough stuff, isn't it? It's very high ethical stuff. one of the rabbis that I like a lot, I read a lot of stuff he writes, he talked about in the Beatitudes that begin Jesus' Sermon on the Mount. The Beatitudes are blessed are the poor in spirit and so forth. And one of them says, blessed are the peacemakers. And he says this, to work for peace, you must have a peaceful heart. When you do, you're a child of God. But many people who work for peace are not at peace within themselves. They still harbor anger and frustration, and their work is not really peaceful. That's a little higher standard, isn't it? It's very difficult. So what a lot of times people have done with things like the Ten Commandments and the Sermon on the Mount and everything that happens between them is to treat them as very much like a set of rules between us and God. Maybe like a treaty. This is the way a lot of people originally looked at the Ten Commandments. It's a special promise, a covenant. It's like a treaty. So one of the legends said, you know those two tablets that Moses was either carrying with one finger or carrying with all his might, they were duplicate copies of the Ten Commandments. They're written on front and back. Who knew? And so they're there, and then they put this in a special box called the Ark of the Covenant. And they do that because that's what kings and people did back in that day and time. Usually a king who was much more powerful would enter into a treaty with folks who were not as powerful, and they would make a covenant or an agreement together, and they'd write down their agreement. Maybe the folks who are not as powerful are getting protection, and the one who's more powerful saying, this is what you're going to give me. And they put it all in a special sort of sealed box or something. And some people look at it that way. And then it becomes something little less than a really neat thing that God gives us. It becomes some kind of obligation, doesn't it? And that's the way a lot of times we treat it. So when we think about the Ten Commandments in our vocabulary, a lot of people think about it in this old King James Version. They think about it as a bunch of thou shalt nots. So God loved us so much, we hear all that stuff, and then you get a list of thou shalt not. And it's just like, man, this is heavy, it's restricting. And most of the thou shalt nots are things that I'm having a lot of hard time shall not doing. You know, it's tough, isn't it? And I was growing up, and some of you may remember in our state, in our country, we had laws that were trying to enforce the Ten Commandments, particularly blue laws on Sunday. So restaurants couldn't be open, certain stores couldn't do business, and those kinds of things. Martin Luther in the Reformation said, I sort of look at these laws of the Old Testament and the Ten Commandments and say there's no way any of us could live up to them. So what God's doing is setting us up to fail. And so when we fail, we think there's no way we can live up to the standard. What we need is help. And Martin Luther says that help is Jesus. That help is grace, because there's no way we could live up to the standards, right? Some guy said about the Sermon on the Mount, I thought this was pretty interesting. As a message, it's a message calculated to produce the greatest possible guilt in the fewest possible chapters. Go read the Sermon on the Mount and you'll know what I'm talking about. 3 chapters and it's tough. Not only do you not commit the thing, but if you don't even think about the thing in your heart, I mean, there's just no way you can escape it, right? So what a lot of people do is they sit back and they think, well, you know what? I can't do all 10 of them. But when I was in school, I know if I got a 90 on my test, I came home to Mom, it was great. So 9 out of 10? That's not bad, is it? And a 70, if I got a 70, it's a C. And honestly, if I got a 70 in calculus and I came home, I'd be celebrating that grade, right? So 7 out of 10, that's average, that's not bad. Now we know if we get below 60% in the 50s, that's called failing. And who would want to fail any test, but particularly God's 10 Commandment test, right? We wouldn't want that. Right? Sort of like that old Meatloaf song. You remember 2 out of 3 ain't bad? So we'd say, 7 out of 10, it ain't bad. I'm doing okay. I'm average from a lot of people. And we sort of treat it that way. There's a story of this preacher who was a circuit riding preacher, and he was going to visit his church years ago. And it was really cold, and the bridge had sort of, messed up. He couldn't get across the bridge where his church was. But the water on the river was frozen, so he decided he would chance it and try to cross over the frozen river. But he didn't want to just pound on it, so he sort of slid his feet, which essentially was like skating across the river. And sure enough, he made it to church. And the elder said, well, how did you get here? And he said, well, I sort of skated across the river. And so after church, they had a big meeting. And they said, well, preacher, you skated on the Lord's day, and you can't do that. And we're very concerned about it. And so he said, well, look, either I skated to church or we didn't have a preacher for church today. And so they all thought for a while, and one of them said, did you have fun when you were skating across the river? He said, well, no, it wasn't fun. I was afraid I was going to fall in. They said, well, okay, we're good. Okay. It reminds me when I was in seminary, when the sort of fundamentalist changes were happening at my seminary, they had some trustees come, and one of the things they did were interview prospective professors. And one of the professors was being interviewed, and I was there, and this trustee sort of simplistically said, do you believe that all the people in the Bible are real people? And the guy said, well, not really, because, for example, God and Jesus told stories like parables where he made up stories. Not like a real person, it's a story, it's a parable. And the guy responds and says, no, are all the real people in the Bible real people? And he said, well, yeah, all the real people are real people, right? So it's sort of a really legalistic way of looking at things. And unfortunately, that's what we do too much with God. We turn God into something way distant from us, and we try to come up with these rules and standards. In Jesus' day, they would say there's 613 of those laws in those first 5 books of the Old Testament. And those are laws you can't break. And since we're pretty bad at breaking the laws, we're going to put a bunch of other stuff around those laws for all the possible scenarios that would ever get you close to breaking one of the 613, much less the 10. So they became, and Jesus said, when he came along, he said, man, this is a huge burden, you know. So they got on to him for healing people on the Sabbath day or picking grain on the Sabbath, all this sort of strange stuff. And it's because they were trying to protect people from breaking the law. And it became very burdensome. And it became very little about encountering God. Jesus said, let's get back to the spirit of the thing. Why did God tell us this stuff? So, what if we treated the 10 Commandments and everything in between and the Sermon on the Mount with all this high ethical standard, not as a bunch of rules that we know we're not really good at following? What if we treated it as a vision? This is what the covenant says. When it begins, God says, I want you, my dream for you is that you will be a holy people in the world. You will be a minister, each one of you, a minister to do my good work in this world, to share love and grace, peace, forgiveness, all those things, that you will be a minister. This is my dream for you. And then the 10 Commandments come for us. And there's a lot of others throughout the Old Testament. The prophets sort of deal with this and think, what does it mean to be a holy people in the world? Isaiah chapter 33 breaks it down to 6 things. This is what Isaiah says. These are people who walk righteously, speak what is right, reject gain from extortion, don't take bribes, don't lend your ears to plots of murder, and shut your eyes against contemplating evil. Okay? Then later on, Micah 6:8, the prophet Micah will do something that our kids at Youth Passport have learned many times, and even I have a t-shirt, and they may have too, that says, let's just boil it down to 3 things. Do, love, walk. Remember Micah 6:8? What does the Lord require of you? But to do justice, love, mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. Isaiah 56 boils it down to 2 things. Maintain justice and do what's right. And then Habakkuk, that passage, I know you'll all read Habakkuk every week, but Habakkuk in the Old Testament boils it down to one thing. The righteous will live by faith. My grandmother, Mama Bobby, pulled me aside one day years and years ago when I was younger. And she said, my hope for you is that you'll be happy. That you'll find someone that can make you happy and you can make her happy. And that you'll find a work that will be meaningful and make a difference in the world. And that you'll always be a reader. Those are the 3 things. So why not? Why not get help with the vision for our world? Why not get help for the vision of your own life? I know for me, I've needed help a lot because it's hard to figure out what I'm supposed to be doing, what my vision is. When I was a kid, I just knew that I wanted to be the statistician at Legion Field. I mean, that's where all the ball games were. Football capital of the South was written on that stadium. And I could be the guy for whatever SEC team and maybe get to work for the SEC one day and keep up with all the stats and stuff. When I started college, I just knew that I was going to be an accountant until I took a 7:30 a.m. class at JSU. And so 7:30 a.m. in accounting just never meshed well for me. I got a 70, so I'm pretty happy about the 70. And then I thought I'd be a missionary. But I'm doing what I'm doing here today. I love the story of an old guy. He's 80-something years old. He's on the end of his pier fishing, and he hears a voice. And it says, "Pick me up." He looks around. There's nobody around. And he hears it again, "Pick me up." And he looks down in the water, and there's a frog floating on the water. And he said, "Did you say something?" And he said, "Yeah, pick me up." So he picks the frog up out of the water, and the frog says, "If you'll kiss me, I will turn into the most beautiful woman you've ever seen. And I'll be your wife, and I'll treat you wonderfully, and all your friends will be jealous." And he thinks about it for a while. He puts the frog in his pocket, heads back to the pier toward his house, and the frog says, "Wait a minute, did you hear what I said? I said, kiss me, and I will turn into this beautiful wife for you, and everybody will be jealous." And he said, "You know, at my age, I think I'd rather have a talking frog." So, you know what? We figure it out. We try to figure it out. Try to figure out, what am I supposed to be doing? What am I about here? And our visions change, and sometimes our visions change because something happens to us and we didn't anticipate it, and we have to readjust our visions. So why not? Why not let God share a little bit about God's dream for you in your life? Instead of treating God like a person that just gives us a bunch of thou shalt nots and lists and rules that God knows and we know we can never truly fulfill. Instead, what about listening to it as a vision for our lives? You know, one of the many images people have for God, because God's just great and holy and different from us, and we can't really comprehend God fully, we have all these images of ways to describe God. One of them is a parent. I was reading an article from a psychologist about parenting recently, and it said, you know, a lot of parents have difficulty trying to be a friend to your child, but also being a parent to your child, and part of that's setting limits and boundaries for your kid. And this is what he wrote. He said, the key to this is to strike a balance between offering our children support and empathy and simultaneously providing structure through clear expectations of how we would like them to behave. It is the constant, natural back and forth between love and limits that is the mark of a great parent. So what if we saw God like that? Not as restricting us, trying to set us up to fail, but of loving us deeply. Of saying, I have this dream for your life. I want you to be happy. And I want you to be able to make other people happy too. And I want you to find something that's meaningful in the world. I want you to have a good relationship with me, and I want you to have a great relationship with the people around you. Tut Smith was supposed to read Scripture in early service, so when I sent out recruiting Scripture readers, I said, "Hey, it's the 10 Commandments. Would you read?" And he said, "Sure, I will. In fact, I've been thinking about the 10 Commandments lately." And I said, "Really?" He said, "Yeah, for some reason, this story reminded me when I was 6 or 7 years old." So my daddy came up before I went to bed and said, "Little Tut," it was Little Tut back then, "Little Tut, did you brush your teeth?" And he said, "Yes, sir, I brushed my teeth." He said, then Daddy went over and looked at my toothbrush. And Tut could tell the story much better than me. He said he rubbed his thumb across the dry, bony bristles of the brush. It had not gotten wet. He said, at that moment, I knew I was toast. And Tut said, you know, you've often heard that saying that the spanking hurts the parent worse than it does the kid. He goes, well, no. So he said, I learned in my body what it meant that I needed in my soul, which is do not lie. And then he said, I've tried the rest of my life to apply that lesson, to do the best I could. So listen again to the 10 Commandments. This is a little small list that I shared on Wednesday night. Somebody came up with, and it was for children. So they're sort of boiling it down. But listen to it again this way. Put God first. Worship Him only. No bad words. Work 6, rest 1. Obey your parents. Harm no one. Don't cheat. If it's not yours, don't take it. Tell the truth. And don't be jealous of other people's stuff. Doesn't that sound very relational? It does to me. In fact, this is the way the 10 Commandments start. You remember me? God says, I'm the one who redeemed you. I'm the one who rescued you out of the bondage of Egypt. So, put me first. Love me in all the 10 Commandments. Remember Charlton Heston in that old 10 Commandments movie? Cecil B. DeMille, right, or something like that? and he sees the Ten Commandments out of the fiery cloud. They're all written down. And Charlton Heston goes to get these smoky tablets. And he says that only the way Charlton Heston's voice could say, written with the finger of God. It's the only thing we know of that God personally wrote. Sounds very relational. And when Jesus goes up the mountain for the Sermon on the Mount, or down at the bottom of the amphitheater, wherever, this is the way it starts. All his friends, his disciples, and his students came close to him. And then he began to say to them, blessed are you who are poor in spirit. Sounds very relational to me. God's vision, it's not about binding us. It's not about a lot of thou shalt nots. It's about loving us. It's about God having a dream for the way this world could really be. One of my favorite verses in the Bible is 1 Peter 5:7. It says, cast all your worries on him, for he cares about you. I'll admit, many times in my life, I've not lived up to God's vision for me. Maybe you're the same place too. But I believe God has always loved me and always been faithful to me. I hope you'll think about God that way. Instead of a God who gives a bunch of rules and lists, a God who has a dream. What is that dream for you? Amen.
Hello, I'm Mike Oliver. I'm the senior pastor here at Trinity Baptist Church. I'd like to thank you for joining us for worship through our church website. And also I'd like to invite you to come and visit us. This is a great church. We have friendly people here. We value worship. We value community and global missions. And there are programs for children all the way to senior adults. I think you'll like our church, and I hope you'll come and visit us and see for yourself in person. If you have questions about our church, like to know more, we'd love for you to contact us. There's information on our website. You can call us or email us or come by, and one of our staff members will be glad to talk with you. Welcome to Trinity, and God bless you and keep you.